I will start off this video by acknowledging that Mass Effect 3 is not exactly a fan favorite amongst the 4 games that have been released since 2007. And yes, I am aware that my feelings about this game are not shared by most fans of the series. But I like it, so I don't really care. That's the basic premise of today's video. I just want to roughly talk about Mass Effect 3 in particular, as opposed to Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. Even if originally I had this idea to include all the other games and split them into different videos. But I had a lot more ideas for Mass Effect 3 and not enough about the other games, so I wrote down some pointers and I'll get through them as smoothly as I can. And also I wanted to release this in time for N7 Day to celebrate as a sort of new beginning for the content I want to create going forward for all of you. So without further ado, let's begin. For those of you who need a reminder, Mass Effect 3 is essentially the endgame of Commander Shepard's journey and their fight for the galaxy against the Reapers, the threat that's been plaguing our hero since day one. The whole game reeks of death and destruction, taking a much darker turn with its storytelling, the occasional glimmer of hope sprinkled in key moments as every species in the cosmos is fighting for their future against an unstoppable force. This was really the point in which I was properly emotionally invested in the series. Mass Effect 2 had a similar effect on me, where I really enjoyed the setting and the addition of tension brought by Cerberus and, regrettably, the Alliance. But it didn't hit me as hard as Mass Effect 3 did from the very first sequence in the game. The intro sequence alone completely wrecked me, leaving me speechless and barely prepared for what I was about to experience. One of the things I loved about Mass Effect 1 was the simplicity of their storytelling. Every mission you embarked on felt like a step forward in the right direction. Mass Effect 3 does the exact same thing, where every mission feels like progress and not so much as a side mission. This is exactly what didn't click with me during my Mass Effect 2 playthroughs. Besides missions like Horizon and the Collector Base, you're practically just collecting your team and helping them out. Don't get me wrong, I still love that game to death, but that is its biggest fall for me, which in turn makes me appreciate Mass Effect 3 a bit more. I can confidently say there are not a lot of missions I don't like in Mass Effect 3. Actually, I can be completely honest and say there's only one main quest that I hate doing, and that is the Geth Fighter Squadrons. That is the only bit of the story that loses its replayability once you've done it for the first time. Maybe it's the clunkiness of the weapon we are given, or maybe it's the maze we have to run through once we clear those orange Reaper code fragments, but I just didn't enjoy it, and I'm happy to say it's an isolated case. Some side missions are not my cup of tea either, but those are not that important to mention since they're not exactly mandatory to move the story forward. They're mostly played for extra points for your war assets, which most of you will want to do anyways just to be safe, and are mostly combat based with little to no story. Also, side note, as someone who's actually not that great at video games, all things considered, I massively appreciated the adjusted difficulty settings for Mass Effect 3. It made combat easy so I could just breeze through if I was doing a playthrough for the story. But thankfully, the first few missions are some of my favorites from the entire trilogy. For instance, Mars and Manay never failed to set my mood for the rest of the game. I've actually started playthroughs just so I could complete the first act and to meet some of my favorite characters all over again. A great aspect of replaying Mass Effect 3 is simply being able to choose to see new characters. From your choices in previous games, Shepard is able to meet replacements for different companions that had met along the way. Reef, Padaquix, Ron, and the Geth VI being just some examples of this. They're also similar but so different to their respective character. But all of them seem to complement the story wonderfully and are definitely a breath of fresh air for veteran players that have probably seen the same cutscenes over and over again. Granted, not everyone will want to replace their squad members for obvious reasons, but it is a possibility, which really is the important bit here. The old faces of your crew come back, even though not all of them appear as often as one would like. More on that later. But for the ones that stick with Shepard, the dialogue and the connection has improved so much from the previous games. There has been certain moments and scenes that actually made me tear up. Like, that's almost embarrassing. A good example of this was Rannoch when I couldn't keep both the Geth and Quarians, and well, yeah, you know what happens if you're on the AI side. Didn't get to see her again. Y'all know what also made me tear up? The romances. Like I've said before, the dialogue in the romance category improved so much. Everything from little changes from a platonic relationship to the difference in cutscenes swept me off my feet. Y'all don't need to ask who I'm romanced because y'all already know it was main man Garrus. He's my husband, however, I've also been with a couple of different characters like Miranda, Kaidan, and Liara.
Does this say yes to the dress or say yes to the slut?
Miranda's is quite interesting since there isn't as much content with her as opposed to someone like Garrus, since she's off the Normandy. But regardless, it was really fun to finally see her come out of her shell a bit and that we get to see her living her best life, and it's good to see this even if you aren't romancing her. Kaidan, however, was a bit of an emotional roller coaster since the whole Horizon thing happened in Mass Effect 2, but I felt it made him seem more human, if that makes sense. This is especially true if Garrus or anybody else was involved in that little triangle. Nevertheless, all these relationships felt nicely developed to me. It was really satisfying to see character growth like this. Speaking of character growth, Commander Shepard. I'm gonna take a moment to fangirl over myself because when I tell you I'd let her obliterate me, I'm not joking. The upgrade BioWare gave her is insane. She looks like a 10 out of 10. Compared to Mass Effect 1 and 2, her face looks so much better and expressive. Given that they took away the bleach eyebrows I had in real life for a bit, but now she looks like current me, who doesn't shave her eyebrows to be pencil thin. This is also something I've seen in someone else's Shepard where he had a nice beard in Mass Effect 1, but by Mass Effect 2 that beard was non-existent, and then by Mass Effect 3 there was a massive glow-up. Which is funny to me because it's something really small, but it can change so much about a face that you're gonna see throughout 3 consecutive games. But nonetheless, the character really comes together in this one. Even in the intro, they're portrayed as a sovereign for the solution to the galaxy's problems, even after being in so-called jail for 6 months up until that point. There was a lot of pressure on them, which kind of made their character at least seem like it was fleshed out, if that makes sense. It's a topic that most will say that I'm wrong on, since Shepard isn't supposed to have a personality apparently, because they're us and not their own thing. Either way, there's something so comforting and trustworthy about their character regardless if you're Paragon and Renegade. BioWare did not slack off in giving us this character. And this is so especially true in DLCs, which show there's not a moment in this game that can make Shepard seem the slightest bit boring to me. I have to admit, and I don't think it's a rare opinion, I think the Mass Effect 3 DLCs are the best ones in the series. Even the moments I don't particularly like still manage to captivate me, at least in the story-based ones. The Citadel DLC remains undefeated as my favorite DLC in the series. I realize it's technically just fan service, but it encapsulates most of what I've mentioned previously in terms of dialogue and a good, enjoyable mission, including the vast choices in romance dialogue options and special cutscenes. Every character gets their own little spotlight before, during, and after the party, even those who didn't join you on the Normandy, and it's such a refreshing break from the anxiety brought on by the Reaper War. Leviathan fits the theme of the rest of the game, but it does bring a more Lovecraftian vibe to the lore of the Reapers and creates this depth that I hadn't imagined when I first started my Mass Effect journey. The idea of the final bit was admittedly a bit frightening for someone with a fear of the sea and megalophobia, which basically, or just the fear of big things underwater, but I'm proud of BioWare for getting fear out of me without having to use a Husk jump scare. Omega was cool. I'm not the biggest fan of Arya T'Loak, but I really enjoyed playing through this. Omega by itself is really cool, and being asked as Shepard to join Arya without any other crewmates felt somewhat refreshing. Because if you did bring, say, Liara and James along, I doubt there would be a lot that they could say. Also, Arya is very useful as a biotic squadmate combat-wise, and I do like her, but my image of her was tarnished once I read the books. She's a bit silly in those ones, so I kinda had to push that out of my head before I embarked on this side quest. I had been waiting for a character like Nyreen for ages, and can you tell I love Turians? I really liked her, and it's a shame we didn't get her for a bit longer, but I felt like she left us when she needed to. And the way she went out as well, my jaw was on the floor. That was wild, but it only made me respect her even more. However, there's another tiny piece of cotton that should have been there since day one. Javik. From Ashes should have been included in the original game from the get-go. I don't really understand why BioWare decided to add this later, or separately. The first live Prothean we see in the whole 4 games should have just been included. However, if you play the Legendary Edition, this whole rant means fairly nothing to you. Nevertheless, it was really nostalgic and fitting coming back to Eden Prime in this DLC, and the lore brought forth by the cutscenes really cemented Javik's character, which is used for a lot of explaining in terms of Reaper harvests in previous cycles. On that note, I'd like to mention some stuff that could have been a tad better in this wonderful adventure. Some of this I have touched on already, so bear with me. Like I mentioned previously, I will nitpick and mention the whole thing about some beloved squad mates being vacant from a Normandy and not being as present as most of us would hope. Originally, I thought I'd be more upset about this than I actually was, but I acknowledge that in the end, the game would be perhaps too saturated with irrelevant content to each character, and that them running off and doing their own thing was actually the best option. Not to mention that it might have become somewhat repetitive, especially if you're not a fan or a particular squad mate. I think this kind of became a moot point, but I felt like it was worth mentioning anyways. Pesky side missions. A lot of the ring around I had to do just to get my war assets up was actually ridiculous. We don't even get a little cutscene once we've completed them or anything, just about 2 lines of dialogue for retrieving something random halfway across the galaxy. Again, these aren't really mandatory, but I was determined to give Shepard and the crew the best ending possible, so I did them anyways. More of a chore than anything, but avoidable, so BioWare can get a pass on that one. Kai Leng. That's it. I don't want to talk about him since everyone else already knows he's POS, but I'd highly recommend getting the Shut Up Leng mod created by Scottina123 on Nexus Mods. If you bother to do that much, the only saving grace this character has is his voice actor, the lovely Troy Baker, who we all know and love, who's everywhere and anywhere. That's as much as I can say for Leng. He's not really worth it. And now for the final and most controversial part of this whole thing, the ending. I realize I'm gonna get beaten up for this, and I'm not playing devil's advocate here, but I liked Mass Effect 3's ending. Now hear me out. I've seen the original ending before they patched it up and it was not very nice. If that had been my first Mass Effect 3 experience, I would have passed out on the floor and not gotten up until the extended cut was released, but thankfully that was not the case. I will admit I think it had a lot to do with what it made me feel rather than how I thought about it logically. Priority Earth hit me in a way that I was not expecting. Saying goodbye to everyone in such a dark atmosphere really punched me in the gut. I remember around my second playthrough when talking to Liara, and that moment she shares her memories with Shepard. I remember crying so hard that I actually physically felt sick and threw up. I'm not sure why that moment was the moment, but everything I had felt in the hour before that toppled over, and I reached an emotional boiling point, let's say. And also it was the fact that I was so involved and in love with Mass Effect that seeing it come to an end made me not want to let it go. And inexplicably emotional. For context, when I first discovered Mass Effect, I was not in the best place mentally. I was lonely and lost in my own life. And as pathetic as it may sound, the series just made me simply happy. I regained joy for stuff I hadn't done forever, like my art, my writing, and my singing. And I had this endless pool of content created by probably the most sensible and creative fan base I've ever been a part of. There's so many fanfictions that I've read that could so easily been a whole game or part of one, and the way the characters were written were unbelievable, sometimes better than the official books. Additionally, the people involved in making these games are so kind. I have signed prints from both Mark Muir and Jennifer Hale, who are male and female Shepard, and I cherish those prints and the clips I saved from the live signings of my life. And for these and many other reasons, I gained a big connection to the series, and it made it really hard to disregard or even hate an ending so massive and important. I will admit I didn't care much for the Star Child. It was a bit quirky, but to me it made sense, as it was the same child that Shepard saw in the intro. Not so much a kid, but rather a symbol of all the people they could not save, and the guilt of the thought of letting it happen. The very end of the final cutscene, where the crew is rebuilding, might be, to many, lack of closure, but I think it made it easy for BioWare or the next developers to bring the series back to life with a range of options on how to move on. Especially with Shepard's alleged survival, it didn't leave me completely satisfied. I'm not going to lie about that, but with the best ending unlocked, meaning the Normandy scene flying away to me, that means at least a bit of closure. That accomplished feeling coming back once you remember the time it took for you to gather war assets and being thankful for the choices you made in the end. Whew, okay, that was me talking about Mass Effect 3. Bro, this shit was harder to put together than I thought, so bear with me if it's a bit messy. I want to thank everyone for all the love that my previous videos have gotten. I've never expected quote compilations would do so well as they have, and I'm so happy this community seems to still be thriving after so long. I want to continue making content since I really enjoy it, and hopefully this was the first steps to me releasing content again, really. Let me know your thoughts, and if you'd like me to cover 1, 2, and Andromeda. Again, thank you so much for watching. Love y'all. Until next time.